Welcome to this lecture again. This lecture is titled 5 Types of Equality, Implications for Understanding American History. The reason why we are focusing on this topic is to help you as you read the course text and looking at the course objectives. You know that social work is, as a profession, is very, very concerned, whether in terms of theory or practice, very, very concerned about the idea of equality. And one of the concepts that you find very, very much infusing American history is this idea of equality. Equality is a very, very important idea in American history. It has shaped American history really very, very much. But the reason why I think it is important for us to have a separate lecture just discussing types of equality is simply because in my interaction with quite a lot of people, I have found out that they use the term equality, but they do not know that there are different ways that equality is used in the literature. So I will go over these 5 different types of equality. And my point is not to tell you to believe this or that or whatever. My hope is that after you listen to the explanation very well, you can go home, sit down and decide what you think is really very, very useful and very, very important, because I think each one of them has something to say and each one of them has made contribution. But at the current state of affairs we have in the United States or in the world, which of these types of equality do you think is really very, very important for us and we should all come together and work on? So the first type of equality is known as ontological equality. Now the word ontology, because ontological is from the word ontology in philosophy. Ontology in philosophy means what exists and the nature of its existence. So before philosophers start talking about anything, they would ask, does this thing exist? Okay, when they are able to answer yes, then the next thing is, what is the nature of its existence? Okay, so if you do not believe that something exists, there's no reason why you should talk about it. But if you believe it exists, you still have to ask yourself about the nature of its existence. Let me give you a quick example to show you how this philosophical distinction is very important. So remember that women in this country did not get the right to vote until in the 1920, I believe, when the constitutional amendment was made and ratified. But they have been in this country, and women, as you will read in the text, have played a very important role in shaping reforms, social reforms in this country, but they did not get the right to vote until 1920. But the point is, if you ask the people who were in charge of American history or American society prior to 1920, are women human beings? They will say yes. Okay? Now, if they say yes, then you ask them, well, if they are human beings, why aren't they entitled to have the right to vote? Well, that's when you go into the nature of existence. You will find out that there are cultural beliefs at that time that many of the founding fathers believed that women, even though they are human beings, in terms of the nature of their existence, they were considered to be subordinate to men. And that was why they were not initially given the right to vote, as everyone had the right, especially white men, because white men, and not every white man got the right to vote, because only property owners actually initially got the right to vote. Okay, so just understand this meaning of ontology: what exists and the nature of its existence. So I've given you example that women exist; they believe they were human. People believe they were human beings, but when you begin to go deep into the nature of existence, they will tell you, well, they exist, but they are subordinate to men. Okay, so let's go now into the specific. This is equality at the level of creation. It is an equality that is associated with religious beliefs. So generally, people who believe in ontological equality are people who, especially in the Abrahamic religion, who have creation stories that God created us, human beings, and He created us in His image. And that when we die, we're going to live, but when we die, we're also going to be answerable to Him. I think all the Abrahamic religions believe that. I know there are other teachings in like Buddhism and other kinds of Asian religion like Hinduism, but I don't have the time to get into that, okay? So it is believed that God is the creator of all humanity. We all descended from him and will be subjected to the same judgment by him one day. That's when we die, okay? So in the Christian tradition, this is known as Imago Dei. We are all created, we are all equal before God, okay? Now, I always want to draw caution when I explain this. So this sounds like a very powerful idea. And by the way, this idea of ontological equality contributed to the abolitionist movement. Abolitionist movement means when people organized to abolish slavery in this country. Okay? So people organized, and they were inspired by this. There were very many people who truly believe that God created us all equal, and it's inappropriate for somebody to treat another human being as a chattel. Chattel means you are treating the other person as property. Remember that just as you buy insurance for your car today, there was a time when if somebody had a black slave, they can buy insurance because the black person was a property. The black person was an investment, okay? Okay, but when we say God created us all and he created us equal in his image, you have to be very careful about that, okay? All this idea of Imago Dei, like whatever, it's there, it's a great idea. But when you look at history, for instance, there's a book written by Karen Armstrong titled A History of God. Okay? When you study this book, A History of God, you're going to find out that even though people may believe in God, if you check the history of how people come to understand God, you will find out that there are varieties of understanding of God. So don't get carried away when somebody says he or she believes in God. You have to understand the different ways historically that people come to understand who God is. And when you check, for instance, even in the Abrahamic religion, deeply you're going to find out that there are some nuances between the way people either in Islam, Judaism, and Christianity conceptualize God or think about God. So don't get carried away when just people say God and just say, okay, that's fine, or whatever, okay? And remember that Christians believe in the Imago Dei, that God created us all in his image, okay? We're all human beings, he loves us, or whatever. But how did it happen that before we knew what was happening, some Christians started saying that, well, black people are the descendants of Ham. And because they are the descendant of Ham, they are supposed to be slaves. Okay? So you feel like, oh, initially when you hear Imago Dei, you feel like you should open your hand and we all hug each other because we are brothers and sisters. But before you know what is happening, if you are a black person, you are told that, wait. You are the descendant of Ham, so you are not equal. You are supposed to. So it seems like God changed his mind. Do you think so? He changed his mind? So you can see that even though the teachings of religion starts with very good ideas, but in history, some of these ideas have taken different kinds of direction. And then the other book is by Mark Knoll, The Civil War as a Theological Crisis. If you check the book, The Civil War as a Theological Crisis. And by the way, Mark Knoll was a professor at Wheaton College, and then I believe he's now at Notre Dame. He's a renowned theologian in the United States. And in this book, which I took time to read because I was so fascinated by his argument, was that if you look, the Civil War in the United States was a theological crisis because you have two sides who all believe they were Christians, they were guided by the Holy Spirit, they were guided by the Word of God, but they could not reach an agreement on whether black people are human or not, or whether slavery has been approved by God or has not been approved by God. And according to him, those that were trying to justify slavery using the Bible found it very easy to get direct verses that show that the Bible approved slavery. It was easy for them to get to point a verse directly. But those that were using the Bible to argue against slavery had to get into some kind of argument that was convoluted. Convoluted means the exegesis or the analysis of the Bible has to be done in a sophisticated manner for people to arrive at that conclusion. And for many ordinary citizens at that time, when you get into all these kind of convoluted, sophisticated theological arguments to say that we're all human beings created equal before God or whatever, they just feel like, they cannot just take that, okay? So it was easier for people to use the Bible at that time to defend slavery because there are verses directly that recognize slavery in the Bible, okay? So I am just drawing attention to people to be cautious about this. To be cautious because people may just say this like, we believe in God or whatever, but when you get into the details, you find out that within Christianity, there's a lot of disagreement in the past about whether the Bible recognizes slavery or whether the Bible is against slavery or things like that, okay? And then finally, Froese and Beda wrote a book called America's Four Gods. In America's Four Gods, Froese and Beda made this simple argument. Their concern was not to debate whether God exists or not. No, that's not the issue. The issue was just that people believe God exists, and they went out and collected data in the United States from different people who believe in God. But they asked them, what is the nature of their belief in God? And how did they arrive at that belief in God? And what they concluded was that there are 4 different ways that Americans conceptualize God. And which of the 4 different ways you are more likely to be predisposed to depends on your past experience. Okay? So what that simply means is just that simply because somebody says he or she believes in God does not necessarily mean that all the people mean the same thing. And actually in the book, there's an argument that the greatest war in America is not between people who are atheists and people who are believers. Okay, they believe in God. No. The greatest war in America is among people who believe in God, but they do not mean the same thing, or God doesn't mean the same thing to them. And I would encourage anybody who is concerned about this to go and just really check. So what is the implication of this for equality? Well, as I said much earlier, ontological equality significantly contributed to the abolitionist movement, because some people who were inspired by this idea of ontological equality truly believe that slavery is inappropriate. But I want to also draw a caution here that many people who believe in abolitionism or abolition of slavery did not believe in racial equality. Even if you look at the ideas of President Lincoln, his ideas about racial equality evolved. Lincoln did not approve slavery. No, he did not approve it. But on the question of whether the black people really fit very well into the civilization we're trying to create here or whether they're racially equal, no, he had some reservation about that. His ideas, of course, evolved because, as you know, later on he will write the Emancipation Proclamation. And if you check the history, you're going to see that when he visited the capital of the Confederacy and black people saw him there, they went and they were almost like worshiping him. They thought like he was a new Jesus, but he said, no, he's an ordinary human being, because they never thought they would be free in America. But President Lincoln evolved on this issue of race, okay? So just understand that people may believe in the abolition of slavery, but they do not believe in racial equality. That's one of the major challenges with ontological equality. Okay, enough about that. The second type of equality is called formal or legal equality. And what that simply means is that all members of society are subjected to the same laws or rules. If you believe in legal equality, it simply means that people are judged according to what they have done. If somebody satisfies the legal requirement, period, they get whatever they deserve. Okay? Legal or formal equality. Let me give you an example as an immigrant to illustrate that. When I was coming to the United States, I had to take my application for a Nigerian passport to the pastor of the church I was attending so that he would bless it. After he blessed it, then I will get favor in the eyes of the immigration officer when I go and file the application. This favor that I'm supposed to get from the immigration officer is not about changing the whole society so that there will be a level playing field. Anybody who satisfies the legal requirements would get what he or she deserves. No, it's just that I would have a favor because I'm a Christian. Okay? So he prayed on it, and then I took it. I finally got it. I came to the United States, but when I applied for American passport, I remember, I will confess to you that that morning before I went to the post office to submit my application, I did not pray about the application. Why? Because already, having been in the United States, I have been influenced by this idea of formal or legal equality. The idea was just that if I go to the post office and I show the correct documents and everything, the post office officer is going to accept it. He's not going to say, oh, Samuel, you do not have an aquiline noise, so I'm not going to accept this application or something like that. You see, legal equality means we're all equal before the law. So that's very important. Now, applying the law, it means applying the law universally and uniformly across the board. And this is an integral part of Western democratic societies. If you check, for instance, the French Revolution was about that. By and large, the American Revolution, even though it condoned slavery, but it was about that. This idea that there has to be procedure. There has to be some laws that applies to everybody. A good example of this formal or legal equality is when President Clinton, you remember, was forced to go through some kind of interview because of his relationship with Monica Lewinsky or something like that. I think many people in other parts of the world felt that there was something strange about that. This is the president, the most powerful person in the world. His country is putting him through this process. But from the perspective of the United States, is legal, the law. The law is very, very important. Okay? So this is legal equality. Now, the point that I want to draw your attention to here is that there are insights from the sociology of law that should make us cautious about this idea of legal equality. So while the idea of legal equality, which is a product of the French Revolution, American Revolution, and other revolutions, its limitation is that if you are just concerned about enforcing the law, you are not concerned about how the law came into existence, then you are missing quite a lot. Because history shows us that throughout human history, when there's inequality, structured inequality in society, it is the powerful people in society that tend to have a disproportionate influence on the content of the law. If you go out, even in the United States today, you ask somebody, a lot of people, just on the street, what is being debated in the U.S. Congress? The U.S. Congress is trying to make a decision about this law or that law. What is the debate going on there? And what are the implications? Most ordinary citizens are just concerned about paying their bills, going to work and paying their bills. So they would not be able to tell you exactly the content. But there are organized interest groups who are interested in the content of this law, whether it is about taxes, whether it is about immigration or whatever. They will go to the U.S. Congress and lobby, and lobbying is legal in the United States if you're registered, okay? So they will influence the content of the law. And then once the law is passed, and it is passed in an appropriate manner. What I mean by in an appropriate manner is that all the steps laid down in the Constitution for passing that law have been observed. You have to comply with it, even if you do not like the content of the law. So the point I'm just trying to make here is just that legal equality is one of the important contributions of Western civilization to the modern world, okay? But you have to be cautious there, because if there is structured inequality in society, it is the most influential people in that society that tend to shape the content of the law. And the content will be biased in their favor. This is true not just in the United States, but it is true in Roman Empire, it was true in the British Empire, it was true in ancient Greece, and it is true in Africa and other parts of the world like Latin America and Asia. Okay, so that's legal equality. Okay. Then another type of equality is called equality of opportunity. That's the third type of equality. Equality of opportunity simply means people have the same chance to compete to become unequal under presumably fair rules. Now, this may sound really strange to some people, that the goal of equal opportunity is not to create a society where everybody is equal. No, but to create legitimate inequality. What does it mean to have legitimate inequality? Legitimate inequality simply means you are providing people to compete with each other under presumably fair rules. The rules apply to everyone, okay? You say, on your mark, get set, go. They compete. Now, when they compete, we all know that even before they start the competition, that there are going to be winners and losers. So if you lose, unless you have reason to say that there was some bias in the way the rules were applied, you just have to accept it. I have lost, okay? And the winner can go and brag and say anything he wants or she wants. They have won. So equality of opportunity is not concerned about creating a society where everybody is equal. It is rather about creating a society where there is legitimate inequality. Legitimate inequality simply means some people are winners, some people are losers, but the winners did not use gun to become winners. They competed with everybody under the same rules. But then they ended up proving themselves to be better qualified or something like that. So this is why we say individuals are granted the same opportunity to compete for success based on educational attainment derived from personal talent. So generally in a country like the United States or advanced industrialized societies, we use the educational system as the place where we kind of sort out people. So as a faculty, you're supposed to treat all your students equally. You're supposed to give them equal opportunity, even in K-12 or whatever, okay? And then at the end of the day, when they examine, those that prove themselves under the same rules, fair rules, those that succeed can go to maybe prestigious schools and things like that. And those that do not, then they can't blame anybody because they have been given the opportunity to compete, but they did not just prove themselves as qualified. So the interesting thing about equality of opportunity is that you can fill all the libraries in the United States with books about equality of opportunity, but it is not about creating, while inequality is increasing. Why? And you know, inequality has increased in the United States in the past 3 decades, okay? But we have a lot of discussion about equality of opportunity because equality of opportunity is just concerned about giving people the opportunity to compete, to become unequal, so that any kind of inequality that emerges will be legitimate inequality because somebody did not use force to put themselves at the top. Now, the other thing that I want to say about this form of equality requires universalistic criteria in the selection of people to positions in society. It underscores achievement, drive, talent, and motivation. So in other words, universalistic criteria means you have to have a standard way of examining people. I don't have the time to get into the details of this, but when you talk about achievement, like drive, talent, motivation, drive, the kind of family you come from can influence your drive. There are many people who have the potential to do certain things, but because of the kind of background, the kind of context they were raised, they never had the opportunity to develop themselves. So it's not about something genetic that they do not have the drive, but the environment they grew up in did not just provide them the opportunity to develop those drive. Or talent. You need to have an opportunity to discover your talents or potential. But some people never have the opportunity to discover that, okay? And then even motivation. We think like motivation is just there, innate. But there is a way people are raised that can help them become motivated. So here we're talking about, if you like to get into details of this, when you look at the test scores in the United States, you're going to find out that they vary based on socioeconomic status. Children that come from the relatively upper socioeconomic status tend to do better, okay, than children that come from lower socioeconomic status. And there are reasons for that, because when you grow up poor, or your parents do not even have GED or they have just GED, it's totally different from a child who grows up in a family where all the parents are highly educated. For instance, even though President Obama is a black person, but his children, definitely because of the education of the parents, have more better preparation than maybe the children of some white that are white, but they come from a family where the parents are not educated. So you see how this socioeconomic status can affect the question of motivation, drive, and things like that. And then the other thing is, when you have equal opportunity in society, the goal is to create a meritocracy. So meritocracy, what is meritocracy? From the word merit, okay? That's what a meritocracy is. Meritocracy simply means you are creating a society where people end up where they are just because they earn what they have gotten because of their merit. And people who are down, people who are at the bottom because they could not earn anything better. Because everything is based on merit. Presumably there is no any other factor that contributes to someone's position in society or status other than their effort and their ability. In other words, they have the ability and they have the effort, because there are some people who have ability, but because they don't have the effort, they don't have the discipline, they may not be able to reach where they are supposed to reach, okay? So meritocracy simply means if you have a true meritocracy in society, if you go to an organization, you don't have to ask who are the smartest people and who are the dumb people. Because if everything is based on meritocracy, the argument there is that the only people who are at the top are the smartest, and the people who are at the bottom are dumb. Now, I don't think anybody would find this really, really interesting when somebody says that. There's some problem with that. Because we know very well that there are many people who end up at the top, but not necessarily because they're the smartest. Okay? And there are people who are down, but not necessarily because they don't have the ability. But there are other factors that contribute to that. Okay? So, in a book called The Rise of Meritocracy, The Rise of the Meritocracy by Michael Young, which is a social satire, he made the argument that here is the problem that we have. Even if we have a society, because the idea of equal opportunity is to create this society where everybody is kind of like everybody at the top. Everybody at the top is smart, and then everybody who is at the bottom because they are dumb. Okay, but the problem we have here is that can we have a democracy when we have a society that is 100% based on meritocracy? Because all the smartest people will be at the top. Okay, and the idea of the democracy is that the people at the bottom are smart enough to hold their leaders accountable. But if you have all the smartest people at the top and all the dumb people at the bottom, how can these dumb people hold the smartest people at the top accountable? Because before the people at the bottom think about 1 point, the people at the top probably would have thought about 10. Okay? So you can't compare the two. So Michael Young, therefore, in a satire, tried to show that maybe even if meritocracy is something feasible, it may not be maybe desirable always. He's not saying that we should abandon meritocracy, but just understand that if you have a society where you're arguing all the smartest people are going to be at the top and all the dumb people at the bottom, it's not going to be possible to have democracy because the dumb people cannot hold accountable those at the top. The other critique that I think he brings up here is that simply because somebody is smart doesn't mean that person is ethical. And you can't have a society that is very ordered, fair, and just if the leaders are not ethical. Okay? And if you check history, you're going to find out that there are people who are educated who are very smart, but they may not be ethical. They may not be caring. So I wish we can be sure that all the smartest people we have in the world are also very ethical and very caring and very compassionate. Then maybe we can be sure that even though they are smart at the top and things like that, they will still use their compassion, their ethical, moral compass to care for the people at the bottom. But history shows that, no, that's not necessarily the case. So I leave you with that. And then Michael Sandel also wrote a critique and simplistic assumption of meritocracy in his book, The Tyranny of Merit, What Becomes of the Common Good. So the common good is something that we come to realize, like, if I want to live, for instance, in Minnesota, in the Twin Cities, I cannot just be concerned about myself. Because, for instance, some years back, there was all this kind of something like riot demonstrations. Some businesses were destroyed or whatever in St. Paul and Minneapolis in the state of Minnesota. And it affected quite a lot of people, not just the owners of the business. So what that indicates is that I cannot be naive to just assume that simply because something doesn't affect me, I should not be concerned about the community. Because if the city of St. Paul and Minneapolis or the state of Minnesota is doing poorly, I am going to be affected as a person. So I should see my own interests as part of the common good, which means the larger state of Minnesota, the United States, or even humanity at large. Okay? But the idea of equality of opportunity is that if I get something, I earn it, I have the right to do whatever I want with it. It's not your problem. I can decide to spend my money anyhow I want. I can do this and do that simply because I have earned it. You don't have a right to tell me anything to do with it. But Michael Sandel is saying that this is tyranny of merit. Because you feel you earn it, you don't care about the common good. But for us to live in a decent human society, we have to be concerned about the common good. So I want you to go and think about this very, very carefully, about this idea of equal opportunity. It's a great idea, okay? But equal opportunity is just concerned about, on your mark, get set, go. Okay? And we know that there are going to be winners and losers. But that's it. We're not, the people who win can do anything they want. Okay, let's move on to equality of condition. Equality of condition, which is second to the last, is just a correction to equality of opportunity. If you look at the context within the United States, this is part of reform that we have had in the United States. Some people feel, oh, we're talking about just competition, merit, and all those kind of things. But some people look very carefully. They say, look, let's be frank about it. If you're talking about competition in this society, if you have a child who grew up in a family where the family income is less than 30,000 or 25,000, the parents do not have even GED, and then you have another child whose parents are teaching at Harvard or Yale or whatever, let's be frank about it. Even if you give them the opportunity to compete, that's not going to be fair competition because there's disadvantage in their backgrounds. So the idea of equality of conditions says let's try to help people who are disadvantaged, improve their conditions so that we can create a better playing field, so that there can be much better and fair competition. So if you look at it very carefully, in the United States, for instance, when I was an international student, my children benefited from Head Start. There's a program called Head Start. And Head Start, for you to qualify to participate in that, your income has to be at a lower level or something like that. And I used to take my children there, or sometimes I will volunteer. And what I realized they were doing at Head Start is to help children that come from disadvantaged background, okay, to learn what you might call middle-class values. And this is very important, I'm sorry to say, but if you want to live in America, you want to succeed, but you don't even understand middle-class values or whatever, it's going to be difficult for you to succeed. So children that grow up in middle-class and upper-class families, they learn all these things because their parents are part of that culture. But if you get children who come from very disadvantaged backgrounds, remember that every parent wants his or her children to succeed, but some parents have not received the kind of education that would help them guide their children. Okay, so equality of condition aims at reforming the deficiencies of equality of opportunity, and the goal is to create a level playing field or ground for competition. So Head Start simply means we are going to look for these disadvantaged children. We are going to give them a head start. We are going to start preparing them so that by the time they reach elementary school, at least they have been prepared like the middle class children or something like that. Okay. Now, some people may raise questions about that, but that's the intention. And then the goal is to ensure that the conditions for the competition are equal and truly fair. Okay. Equal and truly fair because you're looking at not just, oh, they are just in front of me. Like, for instance, instead of me just being concerned about students in front of me being treated fairly, I have to be interested in where are they coming from? What advantages or disadvantages do they bring to the class? How should I take that into consideration? Now, you can see that we're getting into very sensitive topic of discussion here because some people think, don't talk about that. Just treat them fairly in the class, okay? Now, there used to be a time when I used to teach a course when some students who are taking the course are seniors, and then some of the students taking the course are freshmen or just somebody just starting. And I realized that I'm supposed to treat them all fairly, but because the senior student has already learned quite a lot, they find it really very easy. And then this other student is just trying to figure out the buildings, okay, and they are in the class. You see the point. The point is not that the person who's just starting is not smart or whatever, but the competition, even though I'm providing a level playing field in the class, but because they brought uneven degree of advantage or disadvantage, doesn't change anything. And then the goal is to ensure that society gives everyone the necessary preparation to compete. And I commend Head Start, and then there is something called the WIC program, WIC, where children or mothers that have low income can go and get, is it food stamps or something like that, so that they can give nutrition to the child. The reason why this program was in existence is simply because the development of the brain of the child starts from the mother's womb. And if the mother is poor and she is unable to eat nutritious food when she's pregnant, it is going to affect the development of the child's brain. So if we wait until the child is born and then we start Head Start or something like that, it is already too late, okay? And that's why we had this Head Start. I thought, the WIC program, I thought it was really an attempt to help people who come from disadvantaged background. It is manifested in the form of equality of condition is manifested in the form of positive discrimination in favor of minorities to promote social mobility. So here, what I'm going to say, which is relevant to what you're going to be reading in the text, is that Equality of condition led to the creation of social welfare programs, public education that are subsidized, and social legislation. So for instance, affirmative action is one of those things that was introduced to help minorities. And when we talk about affirmative action, some people feel it just affects just people who are minorities in skin color. But women were also treated as part of that minority group because of the disadvantages that women have had in the history of the United States. So the point here is just that affirmative action, one of the best arguments informing affirmative action or justifying it is a speech given by President Lyndon Johnson at Howard University, where he gave a commencement speech. And this commencement speech is online. If you check, you're going to see it. And his argument, and I remember that in one of the lectures, I told you that President Lyndon Johnson is a white person, but he worked in Texas with minority kids that are of Mexican ancestry. And he just felt the way they were disadvantaged. And that influenced him. So when he went to Howard University to give this commencement speech, and this was where he gave a good rationale for affirmative action, he said, you can't enslave somebody for hundreds of years and then one day lose the chain and just tell them, okay, go and compete, you are just free. Okay? His idea is that even though you set them free at that time, there is cumulative disadvantage that this person has or this person is having in his life because of the heritage, descendant of slave, this, and that, okay? And then the other person who has never gone through that has cumulative advantage in his or her life history. So his argument is that, no, it's not fair to just enslave somebody for how many generations and then say, okay, you are now free, go and compete with anybody. But if you compete and you lose, it's just because you don't have intelligence or something like that. No. He felt we have to recognize that there is some historical disadvantage that these minority groups really face. Okay. Now I know that this is a very sensitive issue. I don't have the time to get into the details, but remember that in one of the lectures I gave you an example of I cited a book written by Ira Carls Nelson titled "When Affirmative Action Was White." When affirmative action was white. And his argument, as I said in that book, was that many people thought affirmative action towards African Americans or other minorities was kind of reverse discrimination. But he said, okay, if you are just concerned about somebody receiving some special or favorable treatment because of their skin color or race or something like that, you should be honest with yourself. For a very long period of time, white people have received preferential treatment in America, but you're not talking about that. You're just talking about these people for just this small period of time. If you are concerned about people being treated fairly, at what point should you start being concerned? Are you going to start just being concerned about fairness in treatment from the 1960s when affirmative action was introduced? Or are you going to start having concern about fairness to all people from time immemorial? You see the point? So there's something to reflect there. But the argument Ira Carls Nelson is just saying is just that if you are just concerned about affirmative action as being preferential treatment for minorities, then you should also acknowledge that white people have received preferential treatment that becomes affirmative action in those days because they were the people who were receiving preferential treatment. So, but you can think more about this and unpack it. So finally, the final type of equality is called equality of outcome. So equality of outcome is a critique of equality of opportunity. And this equality of outcome was what was practiced in socialist countries. Whereas equality of opportunity is concerned, as I said much earlier, about on your mark, get set, go. And then at the end, we're going to see the winners and losers. Okay? But equality of outcome, interestingly, is saying, we don't care how fast you run. We don't care how fast you run. We don't care where you start, but we're going to draw a line here. You are not going to cross this line. When you come, you have to stop here. What does that mean? What that simply means is that if you are a doctor or you are a businessman or something like that, there's a limit to how much income you can make or something like that because the government is concerned about inequality in society or whatever. So they put a cap. Okay, that's what equality of outcome is. They put a cap, and that cap simply means you can't cross this threshold. because we are concerned that the inequality is going to become very wide. This was the kind of thing that was tried in China, it was tried in the Soviet Union, and now it is history. So, but let me explain a little bit their argument. They are trying to ensure that all people get the same result, e.g. everyone in the race passes the finishing tape at the same time, no matter how fast they have tried to run. I've already explained that, okay? And then it is championed and relatively practiced by socialist countries whose main aim is to destroy the foundation of inequality. And the foundation of inequality is, if you like, either private property or some kind of claim to special ability or something like that. So as we discussed merit, with merit, I can accumulate and have billions and billions and somebody is going hungry. That's fine. If I decide I can, through philanthropy, help the person who is hungry, but you cannot accuse me of anything because I earn it, and legitimately, unless you can prove that I earn these billions through some corrupt means, then that's another thing, okay? So those who believe in equality of outcome do not find this really very attractive, that kind of argument, where you allow inequality to just continue. And the argument is that even if you have very strong arguments about meritocracy, when there's huge inequality in society, not just American society, but every society, you are going to reap certain negative consequences. There's going to be so much conflict. There's going to be sometimes hatred. Sometimes innocent people will suffer. You may just go and withdraw your money safely, and then somebody shoots you and take it, or somebody just feels like you own a car, I don't have it, or whatever, and then they hit you, and then they whatever. But if everybody has there's a sense of fairness, and everybody feels like, oh, I don't have a car, but I can see my pathway of owning a car, so why should I go and attack somebody or something like that? So the point here made by these scholars is just that even if you have solid arguments for equality of opportunity and inequality to justify inequality in society, when inequality reaches a high level in society, you're going to suffer certain consequences like hatred. Sometimes it can create group conflict in society and all those kind of things. I can get into that, but I don't have the time to do that, so let me just stop here. So these people assert that freedom of choice is used not to defend freedom for everyone, but to maintain the privileges of powerful social groups. So what does this mean? The critique these people are making, those people who believe in equality of outcome, is that this language of choice that is emphasized is not really, it's just kind of like bait and switch. What I mean by bait and switch is that when you hear it, you feel very excited about it. But even if there's opportunity for choice, if you don't have the means, you're not going to take advantage of that, okay? So there are a lot of opportunities in the United States, some people will say, but if you don't have the resources to make those choices, you're not going to go anywhere. So their argument is that, yes, the language of choice is nice, but this language of choice just gives advantage to people who have the resources to take advantage of that, okay? So if you can put some books here, the books can help somebody grow, do this and do that. But if somebody doesn't have the ability to read and write or to think critically, the book is going to be useless. The choice is there, okay? I go to Barnes and Nobles and I see a lot of people come and use books freely just to enhance their training in their profession or whatever. They don't pay anything like that. But if you do not know how to read and write, are you going to be able to make meaning or meaningful use of any book? So this is where they critique this idea of choice. So I will conclude here by saying that I just want you to think seriously about these 5 different approaches to equality. Okay? I think each one of them has something to say, but which one and where we move, which direction we move depends on our understanding. But next time, I hope if somebody uses the term equality, ask him or ask her, what type of equality are you talking about? If they cannot tell you which type of equality they are talking about, then let him know or let her know that there's a need for deeper discussion about this. I once wrote something on LinkedIn and somebody attacked me thinking that I was belonging to one political party or something like that. And I said, look, I appreciate your discussion of equality, but here are 5 different types of equalities. If you want us to have a discussion about equality, please go and study these 5 different types of equalities and let me know which one of these are you specifically really talking about. Okay? So thank you very much, and I hope that you find this very helpful in understanding American social welfare history.